Hey, good evening, CHCC. So glad you could join us for tonight's third episode of The Big Pause. And we have a special guest with us. You may have seen this face before. This is Ted Petrone. Some of you maybe that are listening, you don't know who this is. He happens to be my uncle and Pastor Linda's favorite brother, right? It's her only brother, I have to say that. But
Younger favorite brother.
Younger, that's right. He is the former president of Navios, which is a shipping and analytics company, and he can talk more to that. He is now with the company in a consultant role, and he's an amazing man, has just an incredible wealth of knowledge in terms of what's going on in the world. I mean, he's going to give us tonight, we started this past Sunday, and looking at some of the signs of the times and what's happening in the world, but he's going to give us, I think, really unique perspective on what he sees. You know, for us, we live here in America, and I think we look out at the world and there's other stuff going on outside of what we see with our limited picture here. So I'm hoping he can talk to that. So
I'm hoping to.
Yeah.
Let's see what we can do, James.
And I'm very thankful that you were gracious enough to come here.
Yeah. Well, I'm very thankful for the invitation.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just talking before we went on, and I'm going to
Right.
tell you how much this house means to me. It's very special, and the people who
Right.
grew up here and live here. Just to talk about the house, I saw my dad for the last time on the planet, just about 40 feet that way, and I was born again up in my sister's bedroom after a prayer meeting or a Bible study.
Wow.
And a conversation that changed my life was Pastor Linda and Pastor Joe had a conversation with a neighbor. And I think my older sister was like, hey, I got this younger brother. I don't know what to do with the guy. And he got me into a college I shouldn't have got into, the Maritime College. And then, you know, my dad died at 14. Maybe we can talk about that a bit. But after that, it has been one blessing after another. God just came into my life and used my sister and your father as father and mother figures for me, and had other people along the way. And it's just been a great ride since a tragedy, which is the worst and best thing that happened to me.
Wow. Changed the whole trajectory of
Took
your
the wind
life.
out of my sails, but you know,
Right.
as you've preached and Pastor Linda has preached,
Right.
sometimes God has to hurt you to get your attention.
Mm.
And the tears that came out, and it opened us up. Linda and my sister Louise Depp, who's also one of the three of us that grew up in East Meadow in the family, we all started reading the Bible separately because something was opening up in us. So, you know, a grain of wheat falls,
Absolutely.
and if it dies, it brings life. And I think that's what happened in our family.
Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of good memories, huh?
Yeah, a lot of good memories.
I have a lot of good memories as a kid, you know, and just to give you a little more context for the family dynamics, when it was a holiday, say it was Thanksgiving or Christmas time, and Uncle Ted was coming around with Aunt Seal and the kids, we couldn't wait, because we'd sit at the table and he would just, you know, impart his, you know, knowledge and all his business acumen and just his perspective on things in the world that we didn't really, so we learned a lot as kids, and we always appreciated him, and he was always a lot of fun.
We had a lot.
Always
We had a lot of fun.
A lot of laughs.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
But
A
you're
lot of beatings. We had a lot
Yeah,
of beatings. We
absolutely.
had a great time. Yeah, a great time.
But I even bigger than that, I respect you as
Yeah,
a man of
Thank
God, and I know you really know the Word, and you know you've brought the Word before to us in church,
Yes.
and that's another reason why you're not here today just because you're related to Pastor Linda and myself, but because you have your own walk with God, and you have something to say. So can
Let's
we
see.
start
Sure.
here? Can we
Let's do
start
it.
here?
Let's do it.
With everything that's going on in the world, and I had mentioned this on Sunday, and I had mentioned Ted's name. He brought up to me in a conversation a few weeks ago about the black swans, and that's why I, you know, got into that, and I tied that into my sermon. But I would love for you to start by talking to that, because you hear a lot of people and they say, come on, this stuff's been going on forever, and there's always earthquakes and pestilences. Right. How is this different in your eyes? What are you seeing in terms of signs of the times that has your attention and should have our attention?
Well, you talked about black swans on Sunday, and,
Right.
and they've been happening through the centuries, right? And
Yeah.
and the early writers in the Bible talked about this being the last days already, right? And people said, well, you're going to have wars and rumors of wars, false prophets. As a matter of fact, I think if you look up the Encyclopedia Judaica, not Britannica, the Jewish, there's been 40 false prophets since Jesus' time.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So that's been ongoing, right? All
Okay.
these signs have been ongoing.
Yes.
So what's changed here in the world, and not in the economy, but in the spiritual world? And I think something I got wrong when I was younger was Israel's become a state, right? So why is that different? I think, remember Jesus said that the Gentiles will trample over Jerusalem until the time of the Gentiles is over. To some people, and I'm agreeing with this much more now, and I think this is where I land, Israel was a nation, a sovereign nation. The Babylonians came in and took over. And since that time, up until 1948, it was the time of the Gentiles, because the Gentiles controlled the land of Israel.
Right.
But since 48, Israel, the Jewish people are now in charge, mostly in charge of the land of Israel. So I think that is, to me and to many people, the final days of the last days. You're getting into it. They say, okay, there's birth pangs, fine, and now the black swan event's happening. So you have Israel coming in, and now things are picking up pace, right?
Right.
You're having black swan after black swan. So that means the birth pangs are getting closer together, which means the birth is coming sooner, right? Everybody who's...
Baby's kicking.
Baby's coming.
Yeah.
And I know someone said something to me and it meant a lot to me. You have to check your emotions. Like, is this what's happening now worrying you? Or are you happy to the extent that, well, if the birth pangs are getting closer, we're closer to Jesus coming back?
Right.
And I think this pandemic has been a shot across the bow to not only the church,
It's a good way to put it.
but to the world itself. I'm going to mix economics
Absolutely.
here.
That's why I would love for you to.
So there's this whole issue with, I'm going to bounce around. Sorry,
Sure.
I'll be bouncing around. Capitalism, what's wrong with capitalism? I can tell you one of the issues is globalization, right? I mean, we're more connected to China today than, say, Italy and England were 100 years ago. I mean, we're so connected. And capitalism was, well, let me just take a step back. You know the difference between capitalism and socialism, and here it is. A capitalist looks at a millionaire and says, everybody should be like that. A socialist looks at a millionaire and says, nobody should be like that. Both systems are wrong. To me, and to many of us in the West, socialism is a lot more wrong. Because how do I say this without being kind? They believe a lie, that man is inherently good. And if we can get globalization going, we'll get socialism right this time. We'll clean up this world event. So I think this shot across the bow has brought us one step closer to the Lord coming back, to a one world government, right? You have Bill Gates, Bloomberg, a lot of European leaders. If you read the international papers, and even in the Wall Street Journal, you'll see headlines that basically say this: it's a global crisis. We need a global solution. And so that's okay, right? Now you think, oh, okay, so it's closer. I think, so that's one step closer to world government. I think if you have another pandemic, maybe like the Spanish flu, and this comes back and kills 50 million people,
Yes.
we will have a headlong rush into a one world economy, but at least at the European Union at the beginning was more of a trading union. And that's what will probably be the first step in it, as far as I can see. Because you want to get rid of all this stuff and say, listen, we need to control this. We need to take care of this. And you're getting a step away from God.
Talk to even like you know, if you don't know, we're going to talk about this in the series on Sundays. I don't think I'll get to it this week, but at some point, America's not in prophecy, in end time prophecy, according to many.
Yes.
Some will say it is. We don't see that. We had a conversation.
Right. And I think the way it could happen, so you have another pandemic. You step closer to a one world government. We've spent $4 trillion trying to pump up the economy now. We're in so much debt, we're never going to repay it. Never.
Another stimulus.
Now another one, now let's say another pandemic comes.
Right.
The world says, listen, we can't trust the U.S. We can't be the reserve currency of the world anymore.
Right.
So we go bankrupt overnight. How does that happen? Well, who's buying our debt? The Japanese and the Chinese, so they can sell us goods, and the Middle East countries, the oil countries, so they can sell us the oil. So there's this trade going on where we're spending too much, and we're like addicts, and they're giving us money to be more addicts, to build up materialism, right? So that's happening now, and you can see that, okay, we go bankrupt, and we're kind of like England is today, where it has been. And the rest of the world goes, okay, you got to go sit in the corner, and you used to be number one,
Right.
but we'll take care of the world now. So you can see that.
It's changing before our eyes.
Well,
right
it could
now.
happen. It could happen very
quicker
quickly
than-
overnight. And as again I said, 10 years ago you couldn't see this, right? You wouldn't see this happening that quickly, right? It's like I bring my sister into and people that were born just ahead of me in the 50s growing up. Did they think man was going to land on the moon in 19? Not a chance, right?
Right.
But when the first rocket ship went up, you thought, well, wait a minute, this could happen. And I think that's where we are now. We've left one room, we've entered another room, but it's not the final room. But we can say,
Analogy.
I can see that final room from here. I can,
Yeah.
a 3-wood can get me to the green. I can
Yes.
make it from here. And
Yes.
you can see that's all happening now.
It's not that far, like you said, not far away.
It could happen tomorrow, but it might be a couple of years. It might be whatever. But you can see it unfolding in front of us, right?
Amazing. What in your dealings with, since again you have a different perspective, a unique perspective, what are people in the world saying? So you do, you spend a lot of time. Your company's based in Greece,
Right.
so you travel a lot. What are you hearing in terms of the uncertainty? Is there palpable fear and anxiety with the people that you see? How are other countries, leaders, since you deal with other leaders in the business world?
I think to bring it back to the States is how is the best country in the world dealing with this so poorly, right? And what happened to us?
You're talking just namely the pandemic itself,
Right. How did this pandemic? Why are we handling?
What would they
this so
say
poorly?
to? How are we handling it so poorly? Like, what would they say? Like, what are we doing as a nation that?
Well,
if you could answer.
Yeah, I think. Listen, President Trump, for love him or hate him,
Yes.
said this 20 years ago. The problem with what happened to capitalism was, in the old days, capitalism brought high-paying jobs, middle-paying jobs, and low-paying jobs in the same towns, in the same state.
Right.
Globalization happened, and all those lower-paying jobs left the country, and it went elsewhere, and it caused a problem with the lower class. So people started saying, capitalism isn't working.
Right.
So I think that was a part of the reason where you have these people going, there's something wrong with the system, and there's something wrong with the U.S. And so what we did is all our medical equipment, right? All our vaccines, as you know,
Yes.
are being made overseas. So we're at the mercy of other countries. And maybe that takes a step back now where we start manufacturing masks and vaccines here. But at what cost? Right? At what cost?
What are we going to lose as a result of that? You brought up Bill Gates' name before. Did you see in the news today? They're saying that the World Health Organization, the Gates Foundation, and somebody else, that emails were hacked. That like a lot of stuff
No, I
is
didn't
going.
see that.
Yeah, a lot of
And-
stuff is going to be
Right.
leaked. And the Wuhan
Yeah.
Lab Institute. So it's going to be interesting how that plays out. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it'll be.
It just looks like that didn't start in a live food market to many people. But to get back to Bill Gates,
Yeah,
he's the
go.
perfect
Go ahead.
person to say he's a world person. I mean, the guy's a genius, right? We talked about him. He reads 150 pages an hour, 90% comprehension rate. Who does
Yeah,
that
no.
for computers?
Yeah.
I mean, he's a computer himself.
Absolutely.
And he's the one who's, malaria, he's trying to cure it with nets, His interesting story of how the world views the United States. Bill Gates went to India. I think Tom Richter might have even talked about this.
Okay.
He went into a small Indian town, and the problem with the third world, by the way, there's fourth and fifth world countries. If anybody doesn't know that, look it up. I mean, third world's pretty bad, but there's fourth and fifth world countries.
Yeah.
And his issue is you have to deal with the overflow of waste, and you need toilets to. If you're going to bring fresh water in, you have to do both at the same time.
Right.
So he went to India, and he went to this poor town, and he went into this hut, and he was talking to these poor people, and they left, and the reporter said, do you know who that was? Do you know that? That's the richest man in the world. And the woman said, well, he's from the West. Everybody's rich in the West.
Wow.
So that's how we're viewed. And then they're viewing us like, well, if the rich can't take care of themselves in something like this, where do we go? Let's globalize it. Let's get a global solution.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing with what he's doing right now. And we're going to get into this on Sunday, just the whole ID 2020. I think to separate fact from fiction, there's a lot of false narratives, I think, that are being thrown out there.
Right, sure.
And these conspiracy theorists. So we want to, I think, set the record straight as to what's really going on and how it pertains to biblical prophecy and what the Bible says about signs of the times.
Talking about that, if you have that, another pandemic or something happens, what's the first thing that's going to go? Cash.
Mm-hmm. That was my next
it's
question.
Dirty.
Getting into
it's too dirty. It's too many germs. And credit cards are going to go. So what's the simple solution? Chips. Yeah. Put a chip here. They want to put a chip in the back here. We all know, if we know the book of Revelations.
Have you followed the quantum dot, with everything going on with the vaccine? And again, I'm giving a lead into what we're going to go into more detail with on Sunday. But this is Rice University and MIT. They have been experimenting, and a lot of research has been done with this quantum dot. Now, it's not really a chip that you would even. They call it a tattoo, but it's like minimally invasive, like very simple. But it could house our medical records. It'll let everybody know. Again, their whole premise is that there are over 1 billion people on this planet that don't have a identification. They don't have that. Right. So this would enable us as a world to globalize for everybody. How that would be beneficial and advantageous.
And it makes sense, right? In the world economy, in the world thinking, it just makes a lot of sense. Let's make it easy.
But that's the thing. We're villainizing Bill Gates. I'm not villainizing Bill Gates. No. And I think he has good intentions.
They all do. All these people that want world peace have good intentions.
But so then what is it then? What is going on behind that?
Well, Satan is the prince of the airways. Mm-hmm. And if you read the Watchman Nee book, which many of us studied, Love Not the World, you realize everything you touch is of the world. And I think God's letting this play out. Right. And Satan's theme is, I'm going to show God that the world's going to worship me and not him. Mm. Right? I'm going to stand up, because he says, I want to raise myself up to be not better than you. Yeah. It's amazing. To be you. Which tells you that was inspired. Because if I'm going to fight you, I'm going to I'm better than you. Mm-hmm. But Satan knew he couldn't be better. He said, I want to be as God. And he wants to say, the Son of Man doesn't mean anything. The world's going to worship me. So behind the scenes, it's, again, a Tower of Babel. Whether it's medically or economically, we will solve our problems because we're man. And even if people believe we're created in God's image, they still think inherently, if you're not a Christian and you don't read the Bible, we're actually good inside. Mm-hmm. Right? So and that's the big mistake. I think that's the big mistake of the left. Honestly, politically. I think people are good, let's get more government because government will be good. And I'm not saying one's right or wrong, you know what I mean? But in terms of, I'm not making political statements. I know. But I think we have mistakes. Those of us who are on the right, we have a lot of issues. Yeah. Their big mistake is man is inherently good.
Wow. That's interesting. You brought up before cash. So, the Bible's pretty clear, and this is also another topic we're going to get into, about the world moving to a cashless society. Yeah. So we've heard the World Health Organization talk to money's dirty. You had referenced that before. Where do you see that? Again, you have good knowledge base, I think, as it pertains to that. So currency-wise, are we close? Do you see that something imminent? Where do you put that on that?
Well,
cryptocurrency, you're seeing a lot of talk about that.
I get my numbers right. I know the U.S. GDP is about $22 trillion
For those people that don't, just GDP.
Gross domestic product. All the goods and services that you produce in 1 year is the value of that is $22 trillion. I think the world total GDP is something like 85 trillion. We're like 25% of the world GDP. And most of that is done exchanged through countries, and it's all done electronically. There's no cash. When we lease a ship out to somebody at $50,000 a day, it's all teleremitted. There's never cash. I've been working at Navios for almost 40 years. Right. I haven't seen cash from them in a long time. It's all just remitted into my bank account. Never see it. I mean, most people, I don't know how it is in the school system, but most people in the business world, you don't get checks anymore. It just gets remitted. And big transactions, it's all done in electronically. There's nothing that exchanges.
You know, interesting too, when you go back to when we had the financial collapse in 2008, and when they sent out checks, you know, from the Bush administration, they were physical checks. Right. So in this last stimulus package, even though it didn't come to fruition, there was talk in there, and I know Speaker Nancy Pelosi was talking to. That was part of the language of that stimulus plan. It didn't go through, but everyone knows this is right around the corner,
right.
And the world is looking to this.
Well, think about how much money the stock market lost, right? The trillion, $1 trillion, let's say.
Right.
Well, where did it go? It didn't go anywhere. It was just people's evaluations of all the companies was now $1 trillion less. Wow. No money, not like money went out the window. I mean, no physical money left anywhere. It's just I value IBM at 100 and now I value it at 90. What happened to that $10? It's just you and I decided it's no longer valued at 100. So you can then manipulate money very quickly like that, just by getting people to think differently. It's very interesting. Once you take cash out of the system, how you can play the system. All these hedge funds that lost billions of dollars, they hit it. They hit it very easily in different accounts around
it's
the
all
world.
legal.
It's all legal.
It's a game.
It's all a game. It's all a game. Wow. Very easily transferred around the world. Listen, if you were just dealing in cash, then we could have bankrupted the Iranian economy quickly. But they're doing black market stuff. They're bartering with the Chinese. They're doing other things. They're using currencies different ways. So eventually, if it all becomes one global currency, nobody can hide in the corner.
Wow.
Every exchange will be known.
Now you brought up the Middle East. You brought up the Iranians. Anything that you see over there that's peculiar? You know, you mentioned in the beginning about, you know, Israel becoming a nation in 1948 and how that's pivotal and how that changed the whole complexion and landscape of looking at signs of the times. Is there anything that you see there? I mean, Russia has a presence there. You know, Turkey is there. Yeah. What do you see over there? And again, as it's tethered to maybe, you know, signs that we see in the Bible.
It's funny, you have one part of the Arab community coming closer to Israel, which is
Saudis,
which is pushing the Iranians farther away because it's the brothers having their own fight among themselves. So it's very interesting. The thing that I do, and I have a prayer list of things, and one thing you know, Earl, I pray for the 1040 window,
right?
Which is in the Eastern Hemisphere from 10 degrees north to 40 degrees north latitude. From the Eastern, that whole, so start in Africa, go through the Middle East into India. It's the least Christianized part of the world. It's got the lowest quality of life. You know, it's got a high poverty. The socioeconomic issues there, besides women have no rights in that area of the world, it's just overwhelmingly godless. I mean, okay, it's Islam, but we know that's not the true God. So that force is trying to push its way into the Middle East, right? And kick. The thing is, they just don't want the Jews in Israel. I mean, they could have taken the Palestinians and put them in Saudi Arabia. They could have put them anywhere, but they had to put them there. Right? Like the Romans, they created Palestine just to stick it to the Jews because they didn't want to call it Israel.
So this anti-Semitism has been going on, I mean, through the centuries, and that's because of the enemy, right? Satan is Antichrist.
Right. And you know, salvation comes from the Jews. And so the world will fight the Jews the whole time. And before you became a Christian, was I a fan of the Jews? Not really. I think most of us, if we would be truthful about ourselves, would say, oh, they're just peculiar people, and they always stick together, and, you know, why do they do this? You know, the joke about the Jewish guy who says, you know, God, I know you picked us to be your people. Could you have picked somebody else, please, right? So...
Well, it's going to be interesting too in the tribulation, not to get like people like, you know, this 7-year window of time that's going to come. And I don't want to get, we can have a whole conversation even about the rapture. Right. And, well, you know, are you pre-trib? Are you mid-trib? Are you post-trib? But
actually, that's a good point. And it reminded me of something I forgot to say before. So the clock starts when Israel becomes a nation.
Yeah,
And one
good.
of the mistakes I made
Right.
was I thought when Jesus said the fig tree should start blossoming and it's the end times, I thought, well, that also meant that the state of Israel would come
Mhm.
back to life. The people's hearts would, and that's not what the scriptures say, right? Because up until the end, right at the end of the Armageddon, when the Jews are about to be wiped out, Jesus comes back and they go, oh my gosh, this is our Messiah. He's saved.
We missed,
It's him. We missed him. So you have a state,
right?
but their hearts haven't been softened a lot. Now, you can see people, if you go online, there's a lot of One for Israel and a whole bunch of YouTube channels.
Right.
Where it's starting to soften underneath in Israel, but normally most of them are secular Jews. And most of them are Russian Jews. Do you know that the reason, when Israel became a nation,
Right.
in 1948, after World War II, the Russians were one of those 5 permanent members.
Yes.
They could have vetoed this. Why did they not veto it? Because 80% came from Russia. And they were socialists. And they thought they'd get a socialist country
Interesting point. Yeah.
to be in the Middle East. And they started out with a lot of kibbutzes. They tried socialism and it didn't work. And they switched to a capitalist democracy.
Amazing how God behind the scenes working all of this out, right, through the years.
Amazing.
And it doesn't. I mean, it was a wasteland, right? I mean,
And
when
we've
Mark
been there
Twain
now.
went there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, a lot different picture when we went there.
Right.
However many years ago that was.
Right, and I've been to the UAE and different places in the Middle East, and nothing's like Israel. Nothing's like Israel. Again, they go back to women's rights. I mean, the women can't do anything in the Arab countries. Nothing.
No.
They say they can, but they can't. It's a terrible place to be a woman. And I would say this to the woman here who thinks they have it tough. And I think there is some issues here. We need to level it out for women. But, go live in the UAE or the Saudi Arabia for a while.
Right.
I had a friend of a lady I worked with who worked in the Middle East.
Right.
A beautiful lady. She went to this party in Saudi Arabia because she worked for Hermes or some big line. The prince wanted to buy her and said, you become my 40th wife and you'll live in luxury the rest of your life. She was a Greek and she said no. But that's how they do it there. Yeah, amazing.
Amazing. Is there, you brought up, we're talking about the Jewish people, we're talking about Israel. And we have a president in the White House, I mean, who is as pro-Israel as we have seen in some time. Interesting to know, too, can I just interject this here, too? It's a little digressing a little bit, but I heard our vice president, now listen, this is not a political statement, we're Christians. And I heard Vice President Pence say that there are more Bible studies taking place within this presidential cabinet than any other in the history of our country. And I looked at that and said, man, we have to be praying for our leaders. Again, it doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter who's in the White House. But I said, we have people that are in the White House, in Washington, that are adhering to godly values and principles. That's exciting.
When did that happen? Who knows? Maybe under George Bush, the son, maybe a little bit,
but not to this extent. I don't think to this extent.
Not to this extent. There's been nobody since Eisenhower was not. Just go through the presidents. Nobody really. Reagan was open to it, but his wife was talking to soothsayers and media.
Yeah.
So I think they've cleaned out the spirits in the White House. And
so you lived through. I was younger, so even you talk about the Antichrist. And again, something we're going to get to and talk about the Antichrist and the false prophet, talked about in the book of Revelation. Book of Revelation, by the way, the only book in the Bible that it says there's a blessing on you, the reader. When we read that book, and Pastor Linda and I were having a conversation too yesterday about the book of Revelation. Do you know all the early church fathers? That was all their sermons. That's the number. Every single sermon that they preached, the book of Revelation was in there somehow. And how far we have strayed as a people.
Way, right.
It's incredible. Now nobody wants to touch the book of Revelation. Nobody wants to touch end times prophecy. Then you're literally cutting out almost a quarter of the Bible.
Yes. It's amazing. But you just, let's put this aside because it really doesn't count.
Yeah.
We don't understand it.
We don't get it.
It doesn't count. Is it
Right.
mythical? Has it happened already? And God's like, well, I'm laying out the blueprints in front of you.
And don't you think the enemy is using that as we get to the final hour?
Yes, I think
That he's using that against the church, as the church has become. We've become
You lost
so
your roadmap.
consumer minded. We've lost.
you
Yeah.
lose your roadmap if you don't use the book of
Right.
Revelation.
And I get it. I mean, as preach. That's why. Listen, I think I'm so blessed as a minister to have been trained and mentored by people that, no church is perfect, right? We always said no perfect people allowed. No church is perfect. But I think we have been raised in a church here that we have the emotional healing, we have the Cloud Townsend material that Pastor Linda, agonized over bringing that out, was on the forefront of that years ago,
Yeah.
and then, but staying true to end times prophecy, and again, how relevant it is. The Bible is more relevant than the news we're going to see in the Times tomorrow, in the Wall Street Journal. It just is.
Yes.
So that's
And Jesus spoke to those
Go ahead.
churches, and he admonished most of the churches.
yes.
Right? And he said, listen, I know
I have
you're doing well, but I
you've
have
done
this
against you.
So I think we in
Right.
America should say to ourselves, if he looked at us, what
Right.
would the problem?
That's good, Ted.
What's the problem? What do we
That's
have? And I think
Yeah, what would you say to that?
materialism, obviously. I think it is. I think that, Jesus compared again the end times to Noah.
Hmm.
Right? And he said there'll be feasts
Feasts,
and marriages,
yeah,
giving into
right,
marriages, there'll
right.
be and I think it's the good things that keep us away from God.
Oh, that's good.
Right?
That's
It's
great.
not the sins. Many of us who go to the church here, hopefully all of us are not really sinning. And if we're sinning, it's not
Right.
the big sins. It's more sins of omission than commission. But there's so much stuff in our way that it gets in our way of seeing Jesus. And
Was it Chambers that said the good is the enemy of the best?
Amen.
I mean that
Yes.
like
we have too much good here.
too much good.
As Lance Lambert said
Yeah.
40 years ago, we live in a bubble within a bubble in this country. Go back to give you an example about it.
Sure.
We have our problems with the government, the federal government, the state government, whatever state you're in, right?
Right.
The problem is we're a good country. We may be going more gray, but you go to South America. I've traveled to over 50 countries, and many multiple times, so I get to talk to people all over the world. South America, Africa, Middle East, Eastern Europe, Far East, even China. You ask them, are your government people good people? They will laugh at you. Because China is one of the most corrupt countries in terms of cash. And we know that. You know why? We've lost, I'm not just saying that country. Navios has lost deals over the years. Big deals. Because we wouldn't fly somewhere with a suitcase full of cash.
Wow.
And so that happens. And then you come here and everyone, what's the guy who came from France? Alexis Tocqueville.
Yeah.
Now, whether he said it or not, his message back to the King of France was, America's great because America's good. He may not have said that exactly.
Right.
But he said the system works.
Yes.
And so we're not all Italians or Irish or African. We're an idea. And
That's
the
good.
best came here. And and Abraham Lincoln said, we were the best, we were the last great hope of this country, of this world. But okay, God was blessing us. But as you walked away from God and you said, well, we can do this on our own. God, just stand over there. We got it. It's like when we get born again, right? It's by grace, but okay, now you're saved by grace. Let me do my works again so I feel better.
Sure.
And that's kind of what happened with the States. God sovereignly brought us together as a country. And we've kind of walked away from the Judeo-Christian. Listen, say what you want about the Catholic Church. I have so much respect. I'm an ex-Catholic, pro-Catholic.
Yes.
Because, listen, evangelical Christians stopped slavery. I don't care how you paint it. There was more slavery in the Islamic world and the Eastern world than there was. Slavery was a way of the world until people in the Christian world said, hey, we've lived with this too long. This is not right. We have to make some changes. Hospitals, we know, orphanages.
Yeah.
It came out of the Judeo-Christian foundation. So, and now people are trying to throw it all out saying, it doesn't work. Have fun.
There's an attack on Christianity, though, in our country. I mean, you can't.
Well, I get the attack on capitalism to a certain extent, not Christianity.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Because my kids,
Yes.
they grew up, there was 9/11, then there was the Lehman Brothers.
Right.
I compare it to somebody who was born in I'm going back in 1895, right? he grew up, he went into World War One. He had a couple of good years, then the Depression hit. Then World War II. So he's lifted up his head and he's 50 and the world hasn't been good to him yet. And this younger generation has seen the downside of capitalism,
Right.
where globalization has taken a lot of the jobs and some of the foundation out of it. So they're saying there's something wrong with the system. They're right. But go live in Greece, like I do a lot, and I'm in there a lot.
Yeah.
It's a disaster. And there's no middle class to speak of, really. It's just the rest of it, like South America, there's rich and
Rich
there's
and poor.
But the good thing about that is, where is Christianity developing? Not in the West.
All the poor.
In those
poor
places.
nations, developing countries.
Developing.
You brought up, Iran before. I mean, what's going on
The
over
underground
there?
church.
Oh my gosh.
Amen.
You're hearing that all over the
All over
place.
the place. And in South America, in Africa.
Africa.
And China, who knows how many.
Chi-
There
yeah,
may be, they say
we'll
there may
never-
be more Christians in China in 10 years than the population of the U.S.
It's amazing.
So maybe that 200 million army that comes over and
Yeah,
fights,
and that's
maybe
in the
it's
Book
pro,
of Revelation.
maybe
Yeah.
it's against, maybe it's pro, who knows?
Wow.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. But again, things are happening at such a rapid pace.
Very quickly.
So, and talk to that for people. What are you seeing, even personally, as we're in this pause?
Yeah.
So, what are you hearing God say to you? Even spiritually? Because my big fear as a pastor is,
Yeah.
and I know Pastor Linda shares my sentiments, that we come out of this and people don't really make any changes and we just go back to life the way it was. And I'm scared because I hear people kind of talking that way. And there's going to be a new normal, but I don't,
Yeah.
people are going to hopefully not get comfortable and go back to the way
Yeah,
things
technology
were.
has
So
really
this is the
had to-
time to prepare.
I think, I'm going to go way back in history.
Yeah, go ahead.
The clock, which was
Right,
invented around the time of St. Francis,
Yeah.
right,
Mhm.
changed things. And we started measuring things, and we started measuring our lives, and it started changing the way we see things.
Mhm.
And I think the rush of technology now, I think Pastor Linda talked about when the missionaries went into Africa and they had the local people carry their stuff for them for a couple of days, and they rushed them so
Oh,
far
yeah, that's great.
that on the third day they
Yeah.
wouldn't get up and go
Yeah,
because they said to the guy, our souls are a day behind us, they have to catch up.
absolutely.
So I was the president of Navios, and so I tried to retire, and they made me vice chairman now, because the vice chairman is the guy that used to be president. We don't know what to do with him. So I mean, I talked to Wall Street, because we're a public company. But when I stepped back, God said to me pretty clearly, and I'm not sure I obeyed him completely. I want all those Sabbaths that you missed over those 8 years you were president,
Wow.
because that's all you did was run for I was like Bill Gates.
Wow.
His life was Microsoft, right? And so when you become, they say the closest thing a man can be to being a mother is birthing his own company.
Wow.
It's his own baby.
Yeah, sure.
It's a different world, but it's a similar.
Right.
And it wasn't my own baby, but I had such a connection with the lady who bought the company. And it was sort of my baby too, to a certain extent. And it just becomes too much, right? And you get so involved in work, and you got to rush here and rush there. And you just sit back, and it's 5 years later. And everything's rushed past you. And I think that's happened, whether you're a nurse or you're a teacher.
Tim Keller talks to that what if you weren't in that environment, though? Think about all the good that you have done.
That's true. No, that's true.
So he needs people in every area,
Yeah,
every sector
yeah.
of society. And God had you in that arena for a reason. And you're a very talented man. And you could have been a minister. You could have been a lot of different things. I know people told you that when you were younger.
But I think God's not only sovereign, but he has some sense of humor.
Mhm.
Because, right, what does a teacher lifeguard? When there's somebody flailing out in the middle of the ocean, you're going to go save them. What do?
Mm.
You kind of swim around them for a while till they get too tired.
Right.
Because if they still have their strength, they will pull you down if you try to save them. Especially if you're a lady trying to. And I think that God, the same with us, is like, okay, it's like if you bought a parakeet, right?
Yeah.
You want to teach him to stay on his cage. So you open the cage and you let him fly around the room, and everywhere he lands, you brush him, till he can only land on top of the cage.
Yes.
And that's what God did with me. It's like, I went here, I went there, I went to money, I had prestige, I had the name, and he's like, nothing satisfied me, even though I'm a Christian. I'll just land back on the Bible and it'll be okay. And he's like, it took 10 years, but you're starting to get the message now. And I think he does that with all of us. I mean, we rush out there and we do things, whatever profession we're in, and he says, okay, go ahead, have a good time. But I'm in that, as Richard Rohr says, a famous Catholic, the way up is the way down. Many Catholics have said that over the years. So if
I love how you're tying in the Catholic. Yeah, listen, you see so many Protestants that they rail against the Catholic Church,
right,
and I never understand it. And some of the people I know, you agree with me. A lot of your favorite authors are Catholic, whether it's Henry Nouwen and Thomas Merton, and you brought up Richard Rohr, who's maybe a more controversial figure.
He is,
in the
he
church,
is.
you know?
But you take the grain with the tares and the wheat, and you take the tares out. The Catholic Church was the church.
Right.
Here's a famous story. I can't remember now, and I have to go back if somebody wants to call me out on it. Is a cardinal, and in Paris, in the height of the when the Catholic Church was at its worst in the 1500s,
Uh-huh.
and a Jewish guy said, I'm thinking of converting to Christianity, Catholicism, but first I want to go to Rome and see what it's all about. And the cardinal's like, there's no way I'm going to let him go to Rome, because he sees that he'll never become a Christian Catholic. So the guy eventually goes to Rome, and he comes back and he says to the cardinal, you know what? I am going to become a Christian. He says, how could that be? He said, well, any institution that's been run this poorly for 1,500 years and is still around, God has to be in it. And the cardinal said, you know why I know that story?
That's good.
Because I'm that man. He became a cardinal.
Wow.
Yeah. Great story.
That is a great story.
In the ruins, God is there, right? I mean, when my dad died and my sisters, we were crushed, he was there shifting things around and opening up our hearts and pushing us out into the world and saying, even though we didn't know it back then, I'm with you. Go. I'll take care. This is part of my plan. And there's been, your dad is so special to me. He came into my life, and my father stood around, but he was like Miss Joe American. He did everything. He was straight. He was good in sports. He loved my sister. He was just a good guy. And God has put Joe Lecces in my life in every area.
Wow.
In business and everywhere else. And it's only God could do that. And only God can do that.
Wow, that's powerful. Well, getting back to, I just want you to impart, even as we're moving around a little bit, and I'm really enjoying this discussion.
I hope they are, because we are bouncing around.
I think it's good. I think that's what these conversations are. And you can go in with a plan, but I mean, the Spirit just kind of leads and.
Well, like Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Yep, that's true. What would you say to someone that's going through this right now? What would you recommend for them in really trying to find God and just hearing His voice, and again, not falling back into maybe our patterns of how we were living life before?
Yeah,
you talk to that.
Well, I think you're relying too much on yourself if you're doing that, and I think. A scripture that came up to me from the Psalms was that I've been saying every day is, Lord, turn me back to you. Make your face shine upon me, then I will be saved. And I say that each day now because I realize if God is not carrying me, I'm not going to make it. And so if I'm out there trying to do it on my own, He will let me burn out. He will... We'll make our own problems. God, why did you cause this? Well, you went down that road. You weren't supposed to go down that road, but I'm using it to bring you back. And I would say to the people that this is kind of like a forced Sabbath on us.
So true.
Right? Like, you guys didn't have a Sabbath. Now I'm giving it to you. And you better listen, because the next lesson is going to be even harder.
Right.
And I would say that to many people. I know there's some pieces.
So you think this is a dress rehearsal almost, in a sense, for maybe...
last days to get the church ready? I think absolutely.
You do.
I think it's a.
You said earlier it's a shot across the bow.
I think it is. I think God has said, in His mercy, please wake up. Right? This pandemic has now unfortunately has taken out many people. I just found out this morning, a friend of all my kids in high school. He's 32, healthy guy, died from coronavirus, and so he can take anybody out. But having said that, we've been forced to sit in our houses, forced to slow down, and if you ever go on vacation for a couple of weeks, it doesn't take until the middle weekend to calm down.
So true.
And I think for some of us, the first month, we're still spinning our wheels.
Right.
But slowly the engine starts revving down. And maybe in the distance over the hum of the engine, we can hear God talking now where we didn't before. Maybe that's what's happening.
That's good.
Yeah, let's hope so.
What would you say, and this is a more personal question. What would you say, could you give me one or two spiritual encounters that you found to be quite transformative in your life, your walk with God? Could you pinpoint at least one?
Well, when I graduated college, so I had become a Christian in my sophomore year, my freshman year of college. I just entered.
Okay.
And so I was living Christian life, not great. You know, you wouldn't go look like, oh, he's a Christian. I mean, you just wouldn't do it. But I wasn't terrible. But the same guy, Harry Roush, who got me into school, got me onto a ship. And I spent 6 months at sea mostly because tankers are in and out of port very quickly. And when you ply the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean, now I was on the 12 to 4 watch, midnight to 4 and noon to 4. So many of those midnight to 4 watches, I was in the middle of the Indian Ocean, calm seas, moon, no moon, and you see what Abraham saw, the stars that were out there. And it wasn't like today where I could call up Seal on the cell phone. I mean, we were talking last night, and maybe we spoke twice in those 6 months. I mean, she sent me 1,000 letters. The letters were always one port behind me, so I got some letters. But by the time I got home, I had like 30 letters that came from her that was months old. But that was a different world back then. But that was me leaving the world, going through Egypt. They had a desert, I had an ocean. And it just separated my old life and brought me into new life. And I was ready to hear Ernie and Dana, some of the spiritual men who
Right.
you've probably talked about, and the Watchman Nee teaching, the local church and the cross that you don't hear in a lot of churches, right? I mean, Christianity without the cross, right? It just doesn't work.
Crossless Christianity.
Right, which is not good. The second one, that was 1977. Listen, I came through the charismatic movement. I speak in tongues. I believed in the gifts. But you always have this in the back of your mind. Is it really true? Is it really? So I was at a church
That's good.
once.
That's
I had doubts. I had
yeah,
doubts.
of course. We all do.
And a prophet, a person who was known to be a prophet. I've never been in that church before or after. I went there with my family. And the guy said, you know, 30 rows back. You stand up. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And it was just before we sold the company. Well, we had, the papers were signed, but it wasn't done yet, right? It wasn't a done deal. And it was looking like it wasn't going to happen. Nobody knew this, not even my kids. And the guy looked at me and he said, you got some business deal going. You worried about the papers being signed. Don't worry, they're going to be signed. I almost fell back in my chair. I mean, then he said, somebody in your family died young and you think you're going to die young. Well, I talked about my father dying at 57. He said, don't worry, you'll be okay. You're going to have a long life. You'll be fine. So far, that's played out too. And he talked about there's been relationships in your life that you were close, now you're far, and they're going to come back in. I think that has a lot to do with me moving back to Long Island and coming back into the family. Yeah. And so this guy was just so spot on with so many things. And you know, it's like one punch, it was amazing to me. It was just, this guy was hearing from the Lord. He was so specific of what he said about the deal and those type of things.
Right. You know, I think, and we want to see that. And even before the shutdown and the quarantine, we saw amazing things happen in open church.
Absolutely.
You know, you've been around the block. You've been to a lot of open church meetings, and you brought up, you know, this man that had a real gift of prophecy. And
right.
I'm excited to see the gifts, I think, move and flow in a new way.
We have a lot of prophets in our church. We have a lot of young people. More sisters, they're more open to the Spirit.
Yeah.
Who flow in that. And where can you go and have the church leadership allow you to get up and do that? Where you can get up and say...
make room for that.
Right, because is a prophet... Okay, maybe here's my theory. Pastor Linden may say I'm wrong and come on next Wednesday, but at the beginning, maybe the prophet doesn't hear well, and half of it's him and half of it's the Lord, right? So, but if they practice, the subject in the spirit of the prophet, subject to the prophet. If they practice it more and they hear more clearly from the Lord, maybe it's 90% them. You know what I mean? So I do think you need to have an open area where people say, "Oh, I thought I stood up and said this word. Maybe it didn't fit. You know, let me go back to the Lord. And next time it fits." As you know, the church is the people, and when you open it up and send to the
Body
Lord,
will be speaking to them.
exactly.
Yeah. If there's
The
a
body
resounding
speaks.
yes,
Right.
there's a resounding no.
Here's the problem. Outside of churches, like, listen, when I came back to Long Island, the truth was, Seal and I came back.
You've been to a lot of churches.
A lot of churches,
In
a big
Connecticut,
AOG church,
yeah.
big Methodist churches,
Right.
Other small churches in Connecticut. And I looked at Seal and I said, listen, we've been everywhere. We can move anywhere now. The company's moving back to New York from being in Connecticut, but let's go back to Long Island. Not just one for family, but because I said to her, we looked at each other and said, where else do we trust the Spirit? Where is the Spirit flowing?
Right.
And we thought, there. Let's go there. And so it's been a real blessing coming back to our church here and hearing you and Pastor Linda and we got to get Pastor Joe up there to also talk every once in a while, and we have some young preachers coming up, but it's open. You can come in, you can make mistakes. It's okay.
Yeah.
No one's going to kick you out. And people come in and they say, I just feel love in here. I can tell you that. I one of the reasons when I went to Connecticut, there was a church in East Meadow that was like Middle Island. We were all sister churches.
Right.
And I spent 27 years in Connecticut trying to replicate that again in bigger churches.
Wow.
And it didn't work. Now, I found some great people. I have some great people. I still think they're great Christians. But I was running after something, like Richard Rohr says. I come back home again for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I came back and I went, I'm kind of home. I'm home.
That's great.
And God's here. And so you just feel like, okay, relax. Just relax.
Love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
All right, before we close, I'm going to ask you one more. Is there anything that we didn't discuss yet
Oh boy.
that you see in the world today? So it was good to get people getting
Yeah.
a bird's eye view, hearing some of your personal testimony, what's going on with your relationship with God during the pandemic, a spiritual encounter or two that you gave about, is there anything else that you see in the world today as it pertains to signs of the times, what we're living through? Hey, it's a wake-up call, shot across our bow.
Right.
How the enemy is chloroforming the atmosphere, how he's trying to keep us asleep to what we're really living in.
I mean, I would recommend everybody read Love Not the World by Watchman Nee and understand what's actually out there. Because, if you
Pastor Linda, to plug that? Did she tell you to say that?
No,
I'm kidding.
No, I actually went out and looked for it and had to reorder it again because I
have it on Kindle.
I have so much books. I have too much materialism. I couldn't find it.
Again, though, just to comment, if you're like, who's this guy they're talking about? Watchman Nee. He was imprisoned in China in 1952. He spent 20 years of his life in 1972. He was executed. Some of his disciples, took his works, brought them to the States, and he's written. He made books, and a lot of books.
It was 20 years in prison.
20 years in prison. Part of the he was a Christian in prison because the government.
There were a lot of Christians in prison in China when the Cultural Revolution took over.
Not much has changed.
And I'll give you just one thing. One thing I would say.
Go ahead.
I heard a Christian who lived through that, a sort of a Stephen Kong type of guy who's a Watchman Nee.
A disciple of this guy, Watchman Nee.
He said that when the communists took over and they started going after the Christians, many of them betrayed their families and gave up their faith. He said, well, who are the ones who actually survived into Europe? He said, the ones who knew the word.
Wow.
So I get convicted because I probably read the Bible more than the average person, but God does not judge us on a bell curve.
Yeah.
And we need to know the word. That would be my last. To me, I'm saying it to me out loud to everybody. We need to, if you can't memorize the word, just get it into you every day. Because when the end times come, or when persecution comes, even if it's not the end times, it's a persecution in your own life for some other reason, you need to rely on the word because it's his gift to us and it directs us to Jesus. And that's what I've learned.
That's funny. I always, and this is silly, and I've never shared this publicly, but I'll always go back to stories of people, whether they were in POWs, in the Vietnam War or World War II, and some of these guys that actually knew the Lord and they had the word hidden in their heart. And then when that time came when they didn't have a physical Bible, and they'd go back to those passages and they would just ruminate on them over and think about them over and over again. I almost prepare myself for like that.
Yes. I think we have to.
Yeah, we have to,
I think
right?
we have to.
I think that's wise. That we be a people. That would be a people of the book.
The people of the book.
People of the
that's
book.
exactly right. And the
Right.
people of the word, and you know, they say again, to go to my Catholic friends.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
because you know what happened to me? I left the Catholic Church and I threw out the baby with the bathwater. I threw out everything, but there was so much good in it that there's some. It's at the end of the day, there's some issues. There's some big issues with the Catholic Church, right? But there's so much good in it, in that people, and they say that the Protestants love the Word and the Catholics actually love God, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we've both heard that from from
I've heard that
Pastor
growing
Linda.
up. Yes.
And it makes a lot of sense because you know some people who know the Word, but if they don't let it go from here to here, right? There was a guy on Broadway who did the whole Gospel of Mark.
Right.
He wasn't a Christian. He memorized it and he read it through. But you need to let it sink in and ask God to speak to you about it. And you know what?
Reads us, right? The Bible reads us.
I wish I could go back 20 years and get to that point because I just sort of did it for I got it down. I read the Bible this year. I'm going to heaven, right? If something happens.
We can get into a pattern of how much did I get through, to how many verses did I
Exactly.
get through, instead of saying, did that one verse get through me? Did it get into? Did I
Stop
really
at that one verse
stop
and
at that
stay
one
there.
verse and just stay there?
And that's what that one scripture was for me from the Psalms.
Reading
right?
biographies of some great saints from the past, and how you hear
Yeah.
stories like that, and they meditate on a passage of scripture. It could be, a couple of verses in the Sermon on the Mount, and they'd sit there for months or
Months,
a long
maybe.
time,
Months.
and
we have to
get something out of that. Yeah.
It's a society of technology, and you can watch everybody. Oh, he's better than me. And back then, people didn't know as much as we know today. And right, it's the tree of knowledge of wisdom, right? Good and evil. And knowledge is a double-edged sword.
It's dangerous.
It's very dangerous.
As Pastor Linda told me last week, we had a conversation. Everything is handled with care.
Right.
Handle everything we touch, and what ultimately is the end. Where is this taking me? Is this taking me away from God?
Right.
And I think that's something for us to look at, and we're going to talk more to that even this weekend. Are the things that we're touching, the things that we're doing, are they bringing us closer to God, or are they bringing us more, taking us away from
Let me
God?
maybe one more time say,
Sure.
check your temperature. Like I check. Is this worrying you, or are you
Sure.
internally joyful that if this is the birth pains coming closer and closer together, we're closer to the time when, right? The only perfect government is a kingdom with a perfect king.
Mm-hmm.
And we're closer to that today than we were yesterday. And if it's speeding up, let's be joyful about it. And when the world's worried about dying and worried about losing their job, we all worry about it. But if we realize that this is all just passing away, it gives us a different perspective, and we can be joyful in a time. And so I think it's like a thermometer. Am I afraid, or am I joyful? Somewhere in there, we need to see. I think it gives us a good barometer where we are.
I think that's a good note to end on. You know what I'd love for you to do? Can you end this conversation praying for the people out there?
Sure.
I would appreciate that. Can't thank you enough for coming.
Well,
today.
it's a pleasure, and I'm honored that you would even consider to talk to an
I
old
think
relic
people
like me.
They're on the edge of their
So,
seats.
yeah, well, let's pray. Lord, I thank you for not only our church family here in Middle Island, but anyone who's listening here today. Holy Spirit, move amongst everyone who's heard these words. They're just words from two men, but they're two followers of you.
Mm-hmm.
And have your word come into their heart. Lord, bless all those who view this and listen to this. Lord, use this Sabbath in their life.
Amen.
To bring them closer to you, to bring them into more realization of you. And Lord, let the world fade away.
Amen.
And let you become clear day by day, as that song goes. We thank you for this time, Lord, and we ask your blessings on the services and the church, and may your church be victorious because of you and your Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Hey, we love you. Thanks for tuning in. If you haven't already, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Next week, Pastor Linda will be back in the hot seat, and I'm excited about that.
Glad to hear.
And she'll have a lot to impart, and she's a wealth of knowledge, and she knows the Lord, and she'll continue to speak to us. And eventually we'll have to, as you said before, Pastor Joe at some point.
Absolutely.
The church would love to hear from him too. So thanks again.
Amen. Thank you.
All right, we'll see you.
Oh, stop.